So I'll just move this out of the way to begin with, because we'll be needing that in a few weeks' time. Today then we celebrate two of the greatest saints, two of the most important saints in the history of our church, St. Peter and St. Paul. They're two pillars that we build a foundation upon for our church, in that we can go back 2,000 years and trace that succession and that guarantee that this is Jesus' teaching. But if they're so important, why do they have to share a feast today? That's the question that I always ask myself on this feast, and I'd like you to think about today. Why do Peter and Paul have to share a feast? Well, the big clue is in the city where I spent 6 years of my life, the city that has become almost like the central office of the Catholic Church, the city that now acts and has acted for 2,000 years as a symbol of unity for all Catholic Christians around the world. And that is, of course, the city of Rome. So what's the connection? Well, in the end, Peter and Paul both went there. That's where they ended up with their mission. And they were both killed there for their faith in Jesus, and they were both buried there. Their remains are still there in Rome. That's why Rome became so important. So, if you like horrible histories, that kind of thing, if your children read it, or you read it, or you watch them on the TV show, you'll like the next part. Maybe if you don't like gruesome stuff, maybe look away now, block your ears. But Peter and Paul both endured gruesome deaths, and it's worth just dwelling on the nature of their deaths. Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. He was crucified upside down because he essentially felt himself unworthy to be crucified the same way as his Lord and Master, Jesus Christ. So his request was granted. He was crucified upside down, and ironically, I think that's the right use of that word, the place where he was crucified is now in the middle of the square that takes his name, the square that's in front of the basilica that takes his name, which has become the great symbol of unity, the centre of our Catholic Church, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And that is where his bones are believed to be as well, underneath that basilica. So that's turned that upside down. He wasn't just crucified upside down. The whole expectation of the world, the worldly power, has been turned upside down. Paul, too, was killed for his faith in Jesus in Rome, or just outside the city walls. And Paul's punishment was to have his head chopped off. Now, there is a place in just outside the city walls that I visited that is believed to be the place where this happened. And every place, so when Paul's head was detached from his body, apparently it bounced 3 times. And everywhere it bounced, a spring of water gushed forth. Now this is just a legend, but you never know, there might be some truth in it. But a spring of water gushed forth. Now my point, when I always visited that place, was Paul must have had a very bouncy head, because the distance between the 3 bounces is from where I'm standing now in St. Catherine's Church, probably as far as the Barlow High School. That's as far as these springs are apart. So if you don't take anything else away from today's homily, you'll probably remember me saying that St. Paul had a bouncy head. I say that because it makes it memorable, and it reminds us that they were both killed for their faith in Jesus, and they were both buried. Their remains are in Rome. Paul's remains are in the basilica that takes his name, St. Paul, outside the walls. So it's just again outside the city walls, and they're only 5 kilometres apart, maybe, round about that. And those 2 saints as I said, are so important. They've made Rome important. They have made that the centre of Christianity. Because Peter, the apostle to the Jews, the first pope, was killed and buried in Rome. Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, the greatest theologian in the early church, who unwrapped a lot of our thoughts about Jesus and wrote them down, he was killed and buried in Rome too. And in God's providence, somehow, in God's plan, it was to have Rome as the centre of Christianity through these two apostles, Peter and Paul. Because in my opinion, I think if they had both been killed and buried in Jerusalem, for example, I don't think Christianity would have spread. They wouldn't have shared God's love as quickly. God has used what was the secular power at the time. If you think about it, Rome was the most important city in the world probably then. It was the centre of an empire which had influence over most of the known world. Everything went through Rome, everything referred to Rome, everything was because of Rome. And so, just like when Jesus turns everything upside down, usually with all the expectations, once again, that secular power, that worldly power, is used for God's purpose. Even before the persecutions stopped 300 years later, persecutions of Christians, and Emperor Constantine made Rome the centre of Christianity. He made Christianity the official religion of the empire, but just as a quick side note, that wasn't as beneficial as it sounds to spreading the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. So these two saints explain to us, this feast day explains to us why Rome is so important, and through God's providence, that city, that empire was used to spread God's love. But the most important thing that links these two wonderful saints is in the gospel, relates to today's gospel. That question that is posed to Peter, who do you say I am? Peter and Paul have both answered that emphatically with their lives, with the way they lived and for what they died. Their answer, in the end, in spite of their weaknesses, in spite of everything else, all their character flaws and everything, they were given a mission by Jesus. They were called, they followed him, and they relied on God's grace to carry out that mission. They experienced the love of God in their lives, and they felt compelled to dedicate the rest of their lives to share that love with others. They answered that question, who do you say I am? Who is Jesus to Peter and Paul? Their lives say everything. They were willing to die for Jesus. We too can ask ourselves, or should ask ourselves, that same question every minute of every day. Jesus says, who do you say I am? Who is Jesus to you? And again, with all our human weaknesses, our deficiencies, our flaws, our sins, our life journey is, our task in our journey of life is to get to the end of our life and to be able to say in one word what Jesus is to us. And hopefully that word is everything.